Level up your LA Kings experience with the new Vivid Seats Elite Seats. All the on-ice Kings action with even more exclusive access. Enjoy great seats to the game along with premier dining inside the Lexus Club with all-you-can-eat food and non-alcoholic beverages. Plus, get a free Team LA Kings item and parking with your purchase. Score your Vivid Seats Elite Seats tickets today and earn rewards on each purchase from the only ticket company that rewards you for buying. Experience it live with Vivid Seats, the official partner of the LA Kings.
You're listening to an LA Kings podcast. For more episodes of this and every other Kings program, visit lakings.com/podcast.
You're listening to All the Kings Men, the official podcast of the LA Kings. Now, here's your host, Jesse Cohen.
All right, welcome back. It is unfortunately recap time here at All the Kings Men. Season ended a lot quicker than obviously we hoped. Joining me to do that, Zach Dooley. How are you doing today, Zach?
You know, Jesse, I think probably like you, there's still frustration with this one.
Yeah.
So I want to say I'm doing good because personally I'm doing good. I went out, I played golf today. I had a good time, got some sun. Personally doing good, but when you circle back a few days later to do this recording, like it just brings back up, I think, the frustration that so many, including, those who play and coach the team, are feeling and have felt and probably will feel for longer than usual, because this was the most frustrating of the four for me. Maybe for you, I don't know. You'll let me know. And probably for a lot of other people.
It definitely was the most frustrating. And, I have the double-edged sword of not having been around the team for the last 3 months.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, it's more frustrating because, right, I'm not there. I don't know what's happening as well. People are asking me questions and I'm like, I don't know, right? Like, I'm just not that I always knew the answer necessarily anyway, but you're there, you're talking to people, you're hearing things, you're fine, and I'm just like, I don't know, man. Like, nobody tells me anything. But on the flip side, I also am not there. Right. So I'm not feeling the it's a separate level of emotion that I'm not experiencing. And, for better or for worse, I have other things pressing on my mind, that I'm worried about. So it was, listen, I did Kings talk after game 6 and it was not fun. And apologies to a couple of the fans who called in trying to be like, oh, we'll get him next year. It's just a game, whatever. Like, I was not in the mood to hear that. And I think I have said in the past, if you want to become disliked by me instantly, the quickest way to do it is after a Kings loss, tell me that it's just a game. Like, I'm not I understand that rationally, but I'm not interested in hearing it in the moment. So apologies to the fans who called in, who might have gotten no answer, no response out of me when they were trying to be positive. But, and this is really hard, and you and I have talked a little bit about it already offline. It's very difficult for us to be in this position because there are things that I believe that I want to say, but I understand how they'll be received by some people. So here's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I think there are tons of silver linings to take out of that loss. But if I mention them, because of who we are and who we work for and how it'll be heard, there will be people who will hear it and say, oh, you're just stumping for the company. And it's like, well, I don't know. Maybe I am, like, subconsciously, I don't know. But the reality is they won the first 2 games. They were up with a lead in the third period of game 3. And like, that's way better than last year. Like, I understand, and I'm not going to dwell on that. I'm just saying, like, it's tough because there are these moments where I'm like, well,
here's the thing.
Didn't totally suck.
For me, this team actually was good enough, and this team actually played good enough to win the series.
Yeah.
But they still didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's so frustrating still, is like, you can point to, I think, 3 or 4 key moments in the series, all of which went against the Kings, where you say, okay, this is why they lost. But they're even more frustrating because the reason that those moments happen is because the Kings played well enough to be in a position for those moments to fail, right? Like, if you look at game 3, they come back from a 2-0 deficit, they take the lead, and you point to the challenge and the sitting back, and you say, okay, the Kings 0 for 2 right there. but they played well enough to come back and get in that position to be let down, right? And then game
Yeah.
4, you point to what I felt was a perfect 40 minutes. You probably, I think, a perfect 30,
Yeah.
but still played more than well enough to be up by 2 goals in the third period.
Yeah.
And then they sit back again and they lose 4-3 in overtime while overly relying on certain players for too many minutes. And then that, as we learned, I think, during exit interviews, those combinations of things lost the team game 5 before even giving them a chance.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just like there's these few moments that were so frustrating because of how well the team played. Like I thought that the Kings were the vastly better team for the bulk of 4 games.
Yeah. There was a caller.
And it just doesn't matter, right? And
Yeah,
that's what's
yeah.
frustrating about this one.
No, it's yes, and the missed opportunity, right? The sense that there was a missed opportunity, because if they had one, and I understand if, but if they had one, then you're like, well, okay, who knows how round 2 goes, right? Like I don't know who they would have played, probably Vegas, but I don't know.
Look, the Kings win a short series, which was very much on the table. Yeah. It doesn't matter if you play 13 guys because they're all well rested for a week, right? Like it's just
somebody called in,
many what ifs.
Somebody called in after game 6 and wanted to talk about the officiating at the end of game 6, right? Because there was that goal. Well, it wasn't a goal, but the puck looked like it maybe might have crossed the line.
I thought so too. Even in arena, I was like, you shouldn't take a look at this.
Yeah,
no,
and
doesn't matter, right? Like it.
Yeah, and then there were
I kind of thought it too. Yeah.
And listen, somebody, I think I saw Jim Fox say on Twitter, like Toronto looks at it all the time, no matter what in the playoffs. So if it didn't, and I was like, okay, whatever. I thought it could have, but maybe not. And then there were like missed calls both ways, or maybe there was Arvidsson cross-checked.
Like there were ample missed calls, right?
And so you say
ways.
like but my attitude at game 6 was, okay, yes, but we are where we are right now because of all the stuff that you just said, and that's what's really important. Like, yes, that's terrible, but so
here's the thing: I watched Joel Edmondson slash a dude's stick directly in half, directly in front of an official during the third period of game 4. It goes uncalled in the Kings' favor, along with 2 or 3 other blatant penalties against the Kings in that period that went uncalled. So there were some BS ones that did impact the Kings negatively. Officiating not a factor for me in the series, right? Like
we would do the game recaps and I would take notes. I don't remember what game it was. I think it was 4 or 5. But Hellenius like murdered a dude along the boards and there was no call. And I was like, hey.
probably should have been. And
the note I wrote down was like, well, I guess we can't get too mad about non-calls because Hellenius.
And there were some bad ones issued to the Kings, and there were some non-calls that should have gone the Kings' way that didn't. But like overall, I mean, I think it's a self-inflicted series for me, not a officiating driven storyline.
Yeah.
I can't point to that personally as a factor.
And I do think it's worth mentioning, because I said, there are these silver linings that I want to talk about, but I don't want to, like, I understand people are still upset. So I don't want to, I know that I hate being told, oh, feel good when you're in a bad mood. So sorry to everybody that I'm about to do this to, but like Darcy Kemper was incredible in games 4 and 5. Was it? I mean, he was great all series, but like in games 4 and 5 in particular.
He was outstanding in those games.
It's another reason to be upset about the loss, I suppose, because you go, look, you got this terrific performance from your goaltender. And I was flipping through social media today and saw a What Chaos clip where they were proposing that the key to winning in the playoffs is having a bad goalie. And their example was Calvin Pickard. And they were saying like his save percentage in the playoffs is .891. But because the Oilers couldn't trust him to make a big save, that meant that they had to lock in and play better. And I was like, okay, I can point to a million examples where having a bad goalie didn't cause that, or even if the team locked in, like 2016-17 season, the Kings didn't have Jonathan Quick for 60 games or whatever it was, and Peter Budaj came in and had a great season.
Didn't the Kings score like the second most goals in round 1? Like,
I mean, like but it was a funny take, but I was like, okay, but the point is,
I get what they're saying,
yeah. But Darcy Kemper played incredible, and it's a shame that his reward was a Vezina finalist notification the day after they were eliminated. So,
you know what's crazy is so many of the X factors in the series that I think that a lot of people, including me or you, would have pointed to, actually panned out the way that they needed to. Like you needed Kemper to be good enough to steal you a game, and didn't steal them a game, but he was good enough to steal them a
Close
game.
enough. Yeah.
Like my X factor was Kevin Fiala,
Right.
who I thought was a top 2 Kings player in the series. You needed production from all 3 lines. They got it. You had to be even or better in special teams. They were. They actually won special teams. And it's like all these things did go their way.
Oh man, I was in such a good mood when we started this call. I'm getting depressed.
I was
again.
too until you made me talk about it again. Like, and that's why like there are so many things that are positive, like you said, but you just have to keep circling back to like they are within another loss in the first round, and it's why it's frustrating, and it's why that we can be frustrated with it. Like the players are too. Like everyone should be frustrated with it still, and probably for a little bit. The silver linings to me are the ones that set up next year. There are things that are like, okay, these things went well, either in the series or the season, and that's what makes this the best. This team, whether they won or lost the series, was still the best iteration of the Kings. In these last 4 years, right? My opinion.
I think most people agree, which is why going into the series, that was one of the talking points, right? It was like, this is the year. The Oilers have taken a slight step backwards and the Kings have taken a slight step forwards. Let me ask you this as a non-born and bred Kings fan, because I've thought about this a lot and I've come to a conclusion that I'm not sure I believe, but I think I believe. Let's say it hadn't been Edmonton 4 years in a row. It had been 4 different opponents, or Edmonton 2 years and Vegas 2 years, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it matters, but I understand why it feels like it matters.
I think it would feel less bad. In the grand scheme, because look at Minnesota. Minnesota loses in the first round every single year,
right?
But they do it to someone new,
right?
And I do think it feels different. Like I still think you'd be pointing to a frustration with the lack of postseason progress.
Mm-hmm.
And the question was posed to a lot of the guys in their exit, that exact question. And the consensus was like, this sucks. It might suck a little more, but it sucks either way. I think that's probably where we'd land, but like I do think it hurts more because it's just the same 2 teams every year. I do think that plays like a mental impact on us as we evaluate for sure.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm sort of getting at is that I'm not sure it should. And the way that I came to this was like, listen, obviously in my personal life, I'm involved in a lot of conversations about the Kings. And so I think it was with, my dad and his best friend's son, and we're in a text chain, and it was like the phrase of like, they can't even beat the Oilers 4 years or something like that. And I was like, well, I was like, does it really matter? Like it's the same 2 teams, Kings and Oilers, but not really. Like, yes, there are a percentage of the same players that have been on both rosters all 4 years. But last year, Victor Arvidsson and Warren Foegele were on opposite sides of the ice. So, and, I've gotten into the ship of Theseus in the past, and sorry, I'm in a weird mood because of life. But I was just like, I understand that it feels bad. But in the grand scheme of things, it's sort of Luc Robitaille. I guess this is a perfect opportunity to pivot into the end of year media recaps. Luc Robitaille kind of said, like, at the end of the day, the goal isn't to win the first round. It's to win the Stanley Cup. And yes, you have to get out of the first round in order to do that. And yes, the Kings are in the same division as the Oilers, so they are statistically more likely to be an opponent, whichever round you face them, than any other team in the Western Conference. But you should be trying to be the best team you can be. And then you'll have to beat 4 other good teams in order to get there. So I was like,
this one, I think, should feel worse because the Kings were the best team they've had, not necessarily because, is that kind of what you're getting at? Like, that's why it should feel worse, I think, is because
it was a missed opportunity. The last 3 years they got beat. This one was a missed opportunity. And the first year was 7 games and nobody expected it, and blah, 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 blah.
If they played Vegas in round 1, it still would have been the best opportunity to advance. If they played, I don't know who else was in the mix. Like if they won the division and played Minnesota, it still would have been the best opportunity because it was the best Kings team that we've had.
So now that I think about it, here's the comparison that made me first think about it. And multiple people have made this comparison. the comparison was to the Buffalo Bills, who lost the Super Bowl 4 years in a row. And I was like, the only thing that the Kings losing to Edmonton 4 years in a row and the Buffalo Bills losing the Super Bowl 4 years in a row, the only thing those two things have in common is the phrase 4 years in a row.
Yeah.
That's it. We're talking about first round exits. And to your point, Minnesota loses in the first round every year. There's plenty of teams that lose in the first round every year. There's plenty of teams that lose in the first round every year for multiple years. And again, I'm not trying to stump for the team or anything. I'm just saying, like, it sucks, but it sucks for not necessarily the things that now it feels good to focus. Sometimes it feels good to focus on the bad stuff. I get it. Like, believe me, I get it. And sometimes it can be comforting to focus on the bad things. I just had a very long conversation with an old friend, and at the end of the day, I had to apologize to him for how many times I mentioned my health issues. But I was just like, listen, I don't know. I find it funny, and I get it. It makes other people uncomfortable. That makes it funnier for me. And so there's a little bit of that going on with talking about the hockey. But yeah, it's tough, man. And I can't even imagine what it must have been. Like, that flight home must have been just miserable.
I'm used to it.
No, I know. But even so,
what was worse, games 3 and 4 were the worst of it for sure. Game 6, I think that it kind of subsides a little by the next day. Then but yeah, like the games 3 and 4 feelings were the worst by far.
Yeah,
I would think, and that seemed to be kind of the sentiment coming out of the interviews and everything too. It was just like the series ended in game 6, but the opportunity was lost in games 3 and 4.
Yeah.
And that was like the worst of the feelings, I think, for everybody involved.
So I guess we'll talk about the end of season media recaps, which is on paper theoretically why we're getting together to talk today.
We haven't had the chance to talk.
Yeah,
about
no,
it, right?
and I think it's important, like, to
to be done.
Yeah. Was there anything not shocking, but anything that you didn't expect out of the end of year recaps?
It was hard to be shocked by anything besides the news that came out 15 minutes before they started.
Right.
Which was that Rob Blake, by a mutual decision, would not be coming back as the team's GM. It wasn't surprising to me to hear what we heard, because I think that the players identified the exact same things that you and I just talked about, right? They pointed to those moments within the series as being what got away from it. They pointed to they felt that they hoped to win last year. They believed they would win this year. That was a huge difference. They thought this was the best team they had. They thought it was the tightest team they've had. They thought that the series set up, the way it played out, was the best opportunity that they've had. I don't think anything necessarily was all that surprising to me. I don't know if anything you wanted to talk, it stood out to you either.
No, after the announcement about Rob Blake, the only thing that kind of surprise is not even really the right word. I would have assumed that the Gavrikov contract answer would have gone differently.
That's fair. Yeah.
And that's and I don't even necessarily know how I thought it would have gone. I just didn't expect that particular answer.
It was definitely made to seem like at the trade deadline, it seemed like there was more progress towards it, right? And perhaps there is, and Gavrikov is maybe he's not as involved, right? Some guys don't want to hear about it until it's like, hey, do you want to sign this deal that we've negotiated type thing? I don't know. Well, that was a little bit interesting for sure.
Yeah, and I'm going to use this now to go backwards. Sorry, I'm all over the place today. Because one of the benefits of me being away from the team is that I have regained a little bit of the perspective that I valued as not being somebody who works for the team. And I don't mean it in a good way or a bad way. I just mean, like, when anybody has any kind of situation, if you're close to somebody, right? Like, I'm sure if you were to talk about your wife, you know more about her than anybody else. So you have that perspective. If you guys spent 5 years apart for whatever reason, you would lose some of that perspective. So I've worked for the team in some capacity or another now for almost 10 years. And before that, I was a season ticket member and a fan, and I was a fan in the 90s and the 2000s. And so now that I work there, I have a different perspective on how the machine works. And I don't just mean the Kings, like the entire industry of professional hockey, professional sports, professional broadcasting. My opinions on a lot of things have changed. But sometimes you hear things repeated often enough that you just believe them. So part of the thing with the Gavrikov thing is I was like, oh, well, I just believed what other people said without questioning it or thinking about it or asking anybody. I was just like, oh, well, I read that a bunch on Twitter, so it must be true. One of the reasons that this offseason is so interesting, and I'm speaking to a specific portion of the fan base who will know exactly what I'm talking about. And for those younger, I will try to explain it in as delicate terms as I can. For those of us of a certain age, the relationship with Rob Blake was very complicated. And the fact that he's now no longer a part of the organization, and I forget who asked Rob Blake to clarify. I think it was Eric Stevens. I was glad for that clarification, that he's not with the organization. He's not taking a different position. He's not being moved up. He's no longer with the organization, because that allows me to begin processing a number of complicated feelings. So again, without dwelling too much on it, in the 2000-2001 season, Rob Blake was in the final year of his contract with the LA Kings and was in a negotiation for an extension and was traded at the trade deadline to the Colorado Avalanche. I believe that what happened in that negotiation was misreported, and that we all, and I say we because I, at the time, thought poorly of Rob Blake. The way the story is repeated is that he tore the captain's letter off his jersey in an act of defiance and a disrespectful attempt at negotiating a better contract. I believe that. He was booed every time he came to then Staples Center, now Crypto.com Arena. He was booed. Like every
On
time.
the level of 0 to Darnell Nurse in the series, how loud was it? Because I wasn't there, right?
4, 5. I mean, it wasn't
okay.
it wasn't as consistent. I mean, he wasn't that like, but I believe, and I always chose my phrases carefully. But before Rob Blake was traded and got booed, I don't think I ever heard the crowds at Kings games boo anybody. And since then, now they do. And I believe that was the moment that the fan base sort of matured from a weird niche kind of to like, oh, these are people care. We're invested. In retrospect, I believe that what Rob Blake did was actually probably kind of noble. He was the captain of the team involved in a contract negotiation, and he believed that a captain shouldn't be a distraction. And his contract negotiation was a distraction. And so he offered to resign the captaincy during the negotiation of that season so as not to be a greater distraction. That was reported on as though he's tearing the C off his. Ultimately, who knows? He was also a big union guy. There was no salary cap at the time. And so everything was comps. And so if he made X amount of money, the next guy behind him would make X amount of money. And as I've gotten older, I have come to believe that what he did was probably the right thing and that I would have done it that way. But the point is, he was booed. He was traded. That was that. Then when Dean Lombardi took over the team in 2006, he brought Rob Blake back as a player. And that was a very we just were booing him. Now he's the captain again. So I don't think he was the captain in his first year. Maybe he was. I don't remember. But Matthias Nordstrom gave him the captaincy back, which at the time was a very what is this? We're mad at him because we've been told that he ripped the letter, and now Then at the end of the 2008 season, the story goes, I don't know if this is true or not, the team attempted to trade him, but he had a no move clause. He declined it. And then in free agency signed with the team that they were attempting to trade him to. So that sat poorly with fans. And so fans who were already mad at him to begin with were mad all over again. Then at some point, I don't remember what year it was. I want to say 2014, 2013. He was brought back as an assistant general manager or something like that. And then his number was retired. And that was sort of it. Right. And then he was with the team for the next decade.
Mm-hmm.
And a generation of Kings fans grew up not having lived that experience. Right. Like, I think the example I used when I was talking to you was like Josh Schaefer, who is 26, 27. You know, he was 2 years old when the trade happened or whatever. So like, he doesn't know. All he knows is that this guy's got his number in the rafters. He previously held a bunch of records that Drew Doughty eclipsed, and he's in the front office. So what's to be conflicted about? But like I said, to a generation of fans of a certain age, it was very complicated. And now there's this where it's like, well, they made the playoffs the last 4 years in a row. I agree with what Luc Robitaille said in the media availability, that Rob Blake has left the organization with a very good team. I certainly liked and respected him in the capacity that I didn't have a ton of opportunities to interact with him, but on the occasions that I did, he was very nice to me, and I think he did an excellent job of recognizing mistakes when they were made and correcting them. And even though as a man in his late 40s, mid to late 40s, oh, not that old, I still have that 21-year-old in me who's like, yeah, but he tore this captaincy off. Like, even though I don't believe it anymore, there's still the part of me that used to that's like, yeah. And so it's weird. I don't know. I don't know what the point of telling that story was. I just wanted to tell it because
I think you just wanted to tell it. And
It's
this
just
is your
weird.
podcast, so you can do whatever you
Yeah,
want. Man.
exactly. And I think I can tell this story now. And if I can't, you'll tell me and I'll edit it out. Nobody will hear this. Before Rob Blake was brought back in an executive capacity, he had retired, and I think he was working for the league. And I was not a Kings employee, or maybe I was freelancing. I don't remember. I had the idea, and I spoke to a number of different independent content creators at the time. This is back when there were like 24 Kings blogs in operation. And I had the idea, I was very fond of the idea of creating a cross-platform content piece called The Trial of Rob Blake, where we would decide once and for all what Kings fans should think about him. Because at that point, he had 2 different tenures with the team. Maybe there was some discussion of retiring his jersey. He did hold a bunch of records. He was an important player in franchise history, however you want to feel about him. And so the idea was, we will assign prosecutors and defense attorneys. We'll get a jury, and we'll do like a mock trial of Rob Blake. And then I think it must have been 2013, 14-ish, because then I was doing freelance work and he was hired in an executive capacity, and it was like, well, we're definitely not doing that anymore because I'm not, right, I have this opportunity. I'm not interested in poking the bull or bear, whatever the phrase is. But I mean, that's sort of where we're at. So any independent content creators out there, if you've just heard that idea, if you want to revisit it, I guess go sick. It was really complicated and required a bunch of people to.
I mean, it's certainly got a new couple of chapters.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
With sides that you could take both of, right?
Mm-hmm. And you know, I was talking to somebody about this, and they were like, well, surely the verdict would have been guilty. And I was like, well, I don't know. That's the point. Is like, even back then, it wasn't clear. What was clear was that a lot of people were upset. But that doesn't always mean that they're right. Which I guess is where I've landed on this season. I don't know.
I mean, in a way, I'm the person you described, right? Like I didn't work here when all of this happened. I've heard it from you a number of times, and I've now heard your opinion of it change a number of times. But look, I think that personally, like, you know, Rob Blake was very good to me. I can think of a time when I was called up from the AHL to take a trip with the Kings. Mm-hmm. It was a very last minute call up, and when we got off the plane, you know, Rob Blake called me over. He just said, "Hey, Zach, we really appreciate you, you know, going out of your way to come on this trip. You know, thanks for doing it." And we talked for a couple minutes. It was just like, he didn't have to do that. I was just, I'm in the freaking NHL. Like, this is awesome. But he did it, you know, and it was just something that I think resonated with me. I was like, all right, this is a guy who didn't have to do that, but did. And if there's been one thing repeated to me about Rob Blake by just about anyone, more conversational than anything, who worked on that side of the team, it was that it didn't mean something to him to be a GM. It meant something to him to be the GM of the LA Kings.
I've heard that.
And while I don't think people will appreciate this, he cared about the team as much as the fans do. The Kings, not the position. It was the Kings. And like I've heard told to me by just so many people, like it was maybe even the Kings or bust. Like we might not see Rob Blake resurface with another organization ever. We might. The business is the business, but it was always instilled in me that like he cared a lot about this franchise. And while I think, there are a lot of things he did you can poke holes in, there are a lot of things he did that I think would be universally described as great. He cared and he tried to do his best to make the Kings, what everyone wants them to be. And ultimately the team that he built and the decisions that were made and the players that are there, it fell short while he was in that position. And I think that's ultimately how he'll be judged, regardless of any of the other stuff that we could say, right?
There was something that I hadn't actually thought about until after Monday morning. I'm a firm believer in believe what people do, not what they say. Like, it's really easy to say whatever I told you we were going to do it 5 today and it wasn't. It was 5. It was 5:30. But patterns emerge that can tell you a lot about who somebody really is. And I hadn't thought about this until after Monday. The fact that I would say all but 3 transactions that happened when Rob Blake was the general manager of the Kings happened without anybody leaking it, which is, I want to be really clear about this, absurdly unheard of in all of sports. That like you didn't know, I didn't, not that I should know, but like Elliot Friedman didn't know, Paul Bissonnette wasn't on, Spit and Chicklets talking about trades that he had heard that were being cooked up by Rob Blake. Like every year, trade deadline, free agency, whatever. He made, and it's not like he didn't make trades. He made trades. Almost never heard about them in advance, which means that the people,
or if they did, it was 30 minutes, right? It wasn't.
Yes, well, that's what I mean by there's a certain window, and for anybody who's not aware, there's a certain window where things have to be.
What's the third one?
It never.
I assume we're talking about Kovalchuk and Dubois.
Yeah, the third one never actually happened. It's a trade that didn't happen. That there was a lot of smoke. It was like in a draft. I don't know. It was like 2017 or 18. But other than those 3, Fiala, Gavrikov, Kemper, Deneau, Arvidsson, like there were big moves made, even trading Kemper the first time, like trade and trade deadline. And, you said maybe 30 minutes before. And that's why I say, like, to be perfectly clear, there's a window of time where like paperwork has to be filed.
It falls out of his hands. Yeah.
All of a sudden, a dozen people that weren't part of the negotiation are privy to the info, and then they call their cousin and their cousin calls somebody, whatever. But like a week before the Fiala trade, nobody was saying the Kings were going to acquire Kevin Fiala. The question was, will the Kings trade their first round draft pick? Well, I don't know, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And, in all the conversations about like, well, who might they trade it to? Well, who doesn't, who has, it wasn't even speculated. The reason I bring it up is to say that in our industry and in any other league, that's crazy, right? Like there are cottage industries built around speculating about trades. There are websites devoted to it. There are journalists whose careers are built around it. Like, so the fact that he was able to operate as a general manager of a National Hockey League team for the better part of a decade with almost never having anything he said to any of his colleagues getting leaked speaks to the high regard that he was held in by those people. Like either that or fear, which, either way, it's impressive. And it hadn't occurred to me until I think Monday or Tuesday. I was like, geez. I mean, it had occurred to me that it was impressive, but never occurred to me what it meant about how other people thought about him.
It's a good point.
And if you can operate in an industry, because let's be realistic, he came into the league when he was, I don't know, 18 or 19 years old. Or I don't know, he played in college. He might have been 20. But the point is 30 years, basically. If nobody's got anything bad to say about you, except for idiots like me, and I'm saying like me, not if anybody listening, if you want to still be mad at him for what happened 25 years ago, that's fine. But if the only people who have anything to say bad about you are people who don't know you, that's a fairly strong argument in your favor, I would think.
If you want to poke holes in the job he did,
Yeah,
I won't say anything. Like,
sure.
the team fell short of expectations, right? And that's a fact. But I don't think that you can, from my experience with him, which is the majority of his executive career, I don't think I've heard really a bad word said about him as a guy or as a leader. And that is impressive because, as you know, a lot of people have come and gone, and consensus seems to be pretty similar.
You just said a really interesting phrase. I'm sure you saw me react to it. You said fell short of expectations, and we can get into this subject in the next episode. But I definitely want to mention, I texted you about it a few days ago. I said, I've got this stat that I hate.
You did. Yeah.
So here it is. And part of the reason I hate it is that it's attributed to Jeff Merrick. So I like Jeff. I think he's very good at his job, but I don't want to give him credit for it. But anyway, can you tell me the 3 coaches in National Hockey League history who have won the Stanley Cup with more than one team and the years in which they did it?
I know that I've heard this thing recently. I don't know who. One of them, Scotty Bowman with the Red Wings and one other team.
He's done it with 3 different teams, but
2 other teams.
Yeah.
I don't. I'm familiar with the stat because I did hear it recently, but I don't know who the other 2. Were they 2 guys from like when there were like 6 teams in the league or something?
It's like before there were 6 teams in the league. It's like the 30s. Like one guy did it in 1934 and 1935, and another guy did it in 1930 something, and then again in 1940 something.
Mm-hmm.
And there have only been 2 general managers who have won the Stanley Cup with multiple teams. Now, one of them was recently, but the other one was one of those 2 coaches who did it in 1934 and 35. He was also the general manager.
Pretty good resume for that.
Yeah. The reason I hate that stat and the reason I bring it up, I hate it because it's true, but it shouldn't necessarily mean anything. But the fact that it's true to me makes it hard to ignore. So the team fell short of expectations this season. But, and a phrase I've become very fond of over the last 3 months, and part of it's my health and part of it's just hockey, is that things can change and things can change very quickly, right? One day your back hurts and you've got a cough. The next day you've got stage 4 cancer. Sorry, I find it very amusing to say.
That's quite the metaphor.
Yeah. But if you and I revisited the conversation we had last year, not even a year ago, maybe 10 months ago, 8 months ago, the questions, remember when we did the top 10 questions facing the 2024-25 Kings? Yeah. Is the goaltending going to be any good? Who's going to play with Kopitar and Kempe? What line is Kevin Fiala going to be on? Is Quentin Byfield going to continue to be any good? Like, we had so many questions. Is Jim Hiller going to be a good regular? What's he going to do with a full year under his belt? Like, question marks up and down the sheet under the shadow of, I have now sort of lost my ability to believe in the concept of good general managers and coaches. And part of the reason is because of that stupid stat. Because of course the implication of that stat is if you hire somebody who's won a Stanley Cup already, they won't do it again, which is like insane. Because of course, if you're hiring somebody to replace one of those positions, like you point to people who've done it before as proof that they know how to do it. But then you look at history and you go, well, it's not like can't happen because it's never. So like, I hate that stat. It's very complicated. So anyway, the point is when you said, failed to meet expectations, it's like, failed to meet expectations that were generated almost exclusively in the month of March.
What do you mean by that?
when the team started this season, I didn't think that the expectation was that they would be in a position to beat the Edmonton Oilers. We didn't even know that the Oilers would be the opponent. We didn't know that the Oilers would be the opponent until both teams clinched their spot in the stand, right? Like with however many games left, the Kings were 4 points back behind Vegas with 10 games in hand or whatever it was. Like,
So I think that the expectation is to win a championship.
okay, fair enough.
And I should addend one, I'm going to say what I think we texted about, which is that stats are not meant to be predictive.
Sure.
They are reflective.
It's another reason I hate that stat.
It's the same as, the stat you maintained very diligently all year, right? The Kings were whatever, and whatever when scoring 3 or more goals. And then in the playoffs,
regular season.
and then 3 times in the final 4 games of the year, the Kings scored 3 or more goals and lost.
Yeah.
Brutal. And any gambler should tell you that you don't make your bets off of stats, right? It was really cool. Like I thought it was one of the coolest stats that I've seen. Like, and it was so crazy how it continued to happen. But ultimately we saw how it ended, right? And I think that I would addend what I said to the Kings haven't met expectations so far. Because if the Kings win the Stanley Cup next year, no one gives a crap what happened in 2025.
Yes, right.
They won the cup in 2026.
Right.
So everything that built to that point would be essentially irrelevant. Like no one remembers that the Kings lost in the playoffs in 11 and 10, or that they lost in the conference finals in 13. No one cares. That one's wrong. I remember that, but like no one cares that they lost the year before.
I just want to take a real quick dig at Sharks fans and say I think they remember that the Kings lost in 2010 because that was like a huge deal to them for some reason. Anyway, sorry.
But no one here cares, right? Like it doesn't matter because they won in 12. So I'm not saying I think they will or that I don't know. We don't know. We don't know what this team will look like in October. But I think that ultimately, like, if your goal isn't to one day win the Stanley Cup, then like what's the point? And you might not realize that for a few years. Like this Kings team might win it after Andre Kopitar retires. I don't know.
Yeah. So,
but like I don't know.
Yeah.
And but I think that ultimately, while you're right that we didn't know what this series would look like, like I don't know, it just ultimately that has to be the expectation. And I think the players and management have said that ultimately it is.
So part of the reason that I've lost the ability to believe in the concept of good coaches or good general managers, and this has now become the thing that consumes my mind way too much. Like I've had mentioned in the past, there are things that I think about way too much. I'm really struggling with whether or not I believe in good coaches and general managers, because if I don't, part of me has to accept that all of this is random, and I've devoted most of my life to believing that it's not. So it's tough. But, one of the things that I always used to say about Dean Lombardi and the Kings teams that won the cup in 12 and 14 is that Dean Lombardi couldn't have known in the summer of 2011 that Philadelphia would one day decide arbitrarily the key to our success is not just a good goalie, but Ilya Bryzgalov specifically. And in order to afford him, we need to trade Jeff Carter and Mike Richards, because for whatever reason, they've lost favor with us, and we believe we signed them to contracts that they're not worth. And so we're going to trade both of them and bring in Ilya Bryzgalov. Traded Mike Richards to the Kings, traded Jeff Carter to Columbus. He then becomes available to the Kings, which is another thing they couldn't have anticipated.
Totally.
The Kings fired their coach that year. Like, so when we talk about like, oh, well, they, Dean Lombardi built this culture and built this team and blah, 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 blah. Well, I don't want to say he didn't, but this unbelievable juggernaut of culture and toughness and championship medal and all that fired their coach, almost missed the playoffs, and had to make a huge deadline, like arguably the greatest trade deadline acquisition in the history of this league, right? It gets brought up all the time. Well, what does that say about the job done prior to that? I would say that the argument is, and it was Luc Robitaille's postseason media availability that made me think about this. Is the goal to win the Stanley Cup? Yes. But the plan isn't to win the Stanley Cup. The plan should be to build a team good enough to put itself in a position where if you acquire a Mike Richards at the right time, a Jeff Carter at the right time, hire the right coach at the right time, that your culture, your team, you've sort of built to something. And so it was when Luc Robitaille said, like, Colorado Avalanche out in the, haven't won in 4 years. St. Louis Blues really good out in the first round. And I was thinking about it and I was like, yeah, every year 16 teams make the playoffs. And by the second round, half of them are gone.
Yeah.
And by the next round, another half. And by the next round, another half, like until you wind up with one team. So yes, the goal is to be the one team. But you can't plan for it, and you can't tell me that teams do plan for it, because I just know that the Kings, when they won twice, there's no possible way that they could have planned for it. And kind of why I said the expectations for this season were set in March. The goal is to have a good goalie, but you couldn't tell me when the season started that Darcy Kemper was going to be a Vezina finalist. Like,
definitely not.
Like that. He was great. And I wasn't planning on that. It would have been lovely if it were, I didn't know that Warren Fogle was going to have a career season, or that Joel Edmondson was going to play more minutes in games than he has in his entire career. Like, so I guess I'm sort of stumping for Rob Blake, which I want to be very clear, feels very weird to me. Because for many years he was a villain in my mind. But like, I just don't think you can plan to be the winner. You can plan to do things the right way. And if you do them the right way long enough, things should work out in your favor. I don't know if that makes any sense.
So I think that the Colorado Avalanche planned to be the winner. And even though that they weren't, they will plan to be the winner next year.
Yeah.
And the year after that, because they have a team. That one thing that I really liked that Luke said was that you have to, if you're in a position on July 1st where you can see a path to, you can acquire and do certain things to build a team that's capable of winning the cup, you're in a position where you could. And I feel like it's not that far-fetched to look at the team that the Kings have and say, oh, if this and this happens, that team's good enough to win a cup. Doesn't mean they will.
Right.
Because look at the games going on right now. Like, Toronto and Florida are both good enough to win the cup. One of them can't, and one of them can't even reach the conference final.
Right.
Vegas and Edmonton are both good enough to win the cup. One of them will not make the conference final. The other two matchups, I personally don't think both teams are good enough to win the cup, but like Dallas, Colorado, both of those teams were good enough to win the cup, and one of them didn't even make the second round.
Yeah.
So it is, I do hear and appreciate your point. But I think that there are 10 teams that are planning to win the Stanley Cup that year, and only one of them can. And you just have to keep planning and be in a position every single year. If you're in a window where you're trying to compete, to plan to win the Stanley Cup and have a team you think can win the Stanley Cup, and ultimately things have to go your way, right? I mean, nine of those 10 teams built a team that was probably capable of winning the cup, but didn't. And they have to be in a position the following year and the following year and the following year until ultimately one day you either look back like the Kings did and you won twice, or it's like the Sharks, who probably had 15 teams that were good enough to win the Stanley Cup and
never did it.
And they never did. But you don't know that you didn't get it done until you truly tear it down and have a complete gap like they do right now, right? And now they're building towards another opportunity to be in that position. They're probably several years away, and they've taken several years off, but like they had a very clear window that you can now look back and say that team planned to win the Stanley Cup probably 10 to 15 times. They fell short. And I think that is ultimately several years down the line, I think with this King group, that we would have to look back. But all we can do is evaluate in the moment. And in the moment, I think that we can, for me, they haven't met the expectations that they have set yet. I think they would agree with that. I don't think that's why Rob Blake isn't the GM 100%. I think it was a true mutual decision of Rob saying, I don't know if this is if I'm the guy to get us over that hump,
Mm-hmm.
and Luke maybe saying the same thing and they go a different direction with the handshake. But,
So that
you know,
I want to, so that'll sort of lead us into another, and then we'll wrap up after this. One of the things that did surprise me actually, um, out of the media availabilities was the repetition of the concept of a new voice in the
mhm.
general manager spot. Um, and Luke Robitaille referenced it multiple times. And listen, I don't know. I didn't talk to Luke Robitaille or Rob Blake. This is my opinion, and as I've said a number of times, I understand that I work for the team, and so there are some things that I won't say that I think, but I will never say something that I don't believe, if that makes sense. So when I say this, understand that I'm not saying it and don't believe it. I believe what I'm about to say. It might not be true, but I believe it. Um, it was the way that Luke Robitaille said it, and the fact that he referenced it multiple times in multiple settings and answers where it didn't necessarily need to be addressed, but it was sort of whatever. But he mentioned a new voice multiple times, right? And he said, we'll
Yep.
need a new voice to come in and evaluate. We'll have to listen. We'll have to see what that, whoever it is, right? Internal, external, whatever. And I thought that was interesting because if you wanted to present this team and say, well, look, progress over time, we just need a tweak here and there, we'll bring somebody in to do the same playbook, different voice, same playbook, which multiple organizations, including our own, have done with multiple different positions over time, right? You lose somebody in one spot and, you bring in somebody else to fill that role and you just go, listen, do what that person did as close as you can. It takes bravery is maybe too strong a word, and self-awareness to say, we feel like we've done a really good job. However, we haven't done as good a job as we would like. Perhaps somebody else has a different idea and might have some, a different perspective to help us. And so I'm going to be watching this obviously very closely, even without those comments, but those comments in particular make me go, well, now I really am curious to see how this is going to go. Because on Tuesday morning, I thought I was pretty sure how it was going to go. And on Tuesday night, I had a totally different opinion. So
I would
forever
have to
watching.
think that to a prospective general manager, the Kings job would be extremely appealing
Yeah.
because you have a team that I think everyone would believe that was good enough to win the first round of the playoffs. I don't know if they would have been good enough to win the second round or not. We don't know, right? We don't know what Kings team would have advanced. If the Kings
Mm-hmm.
1-4, might you say like, oh, well rested Kings team that relies on heavy minute guys? Yeah, they could easily win another round. Then you go from there. But like you have older pillars, but you have a lot of players in their 20s
Mm-hmm.
who are high level NHL players today. You have a lot of cap space to work with. You could go out and sign the most expensive free agent. You could go and acquire, if they would trade him to you, any player in the NHL, regardless of their cap hit. And you could probably do it twice without much maneuverability. The Kings have a lot going for them. They have a lot of younger players on entry level or small dollar deals that give you the flexibility with a rising cap to pay more veteran players. I think that Luke said that the Kings are committed to spending if wisely to win. So if you have a player that you think is your game breaker that costs $15 million, the Kings will spend it if that's the guy that will get them where they need to get to. A lot of things that I would think would be very appealing to just about anyone looking for a job in that sphere. So the Kings should have their pick of the litter, right? Whether it is an internal or an external candidate, would expect this not to be announced tomorrow. Personally, like I would
Yeah.
think that there'll be a due diligence done with a number of people. I think Luke said, when you have a job opening, you have a lot of friends, which means he's had a lot of inquiries already. They've been working on this now for when this goes out 3 to 4 days. So should be a lot of anyone who is out there, I would think would be interested, not only interested in this job, but interested in this job over other jobs. I would think because it's one of the rare situations where you have a team that was good enough to advance in the playoffs with that opening. And I think that would make this a pretty appealing job to anyone who would like one.
And you have the president of hockey operations on record saying, we have a coaching staff, we have internal staff, right? Like not just the coaching staff, but, you know, president of player development and assistant GM, like all these different roles, all under contract, expected to return, but
yeah,
GM has power, right? GM gets to come in and have that new voice and give their input. And, you know, in Luc Robitaille's opinion, it would be very difficult for somebody new to come in and argue that anybody should be replaced. But that's part of the job, right? Like it would be hard to hire somebody and say to them, no, you can't make those assessments. So, you know, like I said, having it on record, I think is valuable. Listen, we're going to get into probably a lot more of these similar conversations the next time we talk, because it'll be the top 10 questions for the Kings in the offseason. And to be clear, there are a lot of them. Again, apologies if anybody was in a bad mood and I felt like I was trying to put you in a good mood. I don't know. That's all I got for today.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think I think it's perfectly fine to still be not happy with it, you know? Because I think there are a lot of guys who wear the jerseys who are still unhappy with it. Quinn Byfield said he's going to think about game 4 for the entire summer. And I believe him because, like, you know what? That dude went up there and I felt bad. Like, he owned it. You know, he owned it as well as you could own it. But you know it's weighing on him. You could just see it. Like, that sits with him. And this sits with a lot of the guys because I don't think it's lip service that this was the best team in that room and that the players and everyone believed, me included, that this was the best team that the Kings have had in this window. And that is what makes this one a lot harder to still talk about. And I think it's fair for that to continue for a little bit. And eventually
it might have been the best regular season team this organization has had since Rob Mike took over as general manager. Well, yeah, record-wise for sure.
By the points, anytime.
One final thought before we go. One of the things that always amazes me about professional athletes is their ability to recall losses in like crystal clear detail. And not just losses, but like moments that they screwed up in. One of the reasons that I love Carter George so much is that I was in our conversation with him. I had clipped a save that he made and a conversation that had been made about that save. And he instantly knew exactly what I was talking about, could recall the moment and the conversation. And I was like, that's kind of cool that there's a kid who's not overly focused on a loss or getting beat. He's actually like, can remember with photographic memory something that went right. So I was like, I kind of like that. Anyway. All right, that's going to wrap it up. Thank you for listening, Kings fans. We'll be back soon, and we will have regularly scheduled episodes all through the offseason, and if any news breaks, we will obviously react to it. Zach, thank you for joining me.
Jesse, thank you for having me.
And I'll talk to you like in a couple days.